Jesus didn't have a problem with people that's in the streets. He had a problem with religious people.
How can I help anybody when I was not even able to help my own son?
I would never do that. And I became that in a matter of minutes when they took my pain pills away.
And I said, I'm not where I want to be, but thank God I'm not what I used to be.
This is Faith in Your Recovery. I am Randy Davis. Welcome to the battle. Hey, welcome once again to Faith in Your Recovery. Thanks for joining us. Make sure you tell your friends. Go ahead and subscribe. Hey, we're live as we have been here for a while. So if you got a question, you got a comment, get it typed in there and we'll try to get to it as quickly as possible. Our guest today coming to us from at least a warmer Florida. I almost said sunny, but it says like they've had their share of rain today. You Hoosiers, do you remember what rain is? We haven't had a lot of that, but it's still around us and we're doing all right. We're going to make it. But our guest is Justin Long. Justin's an author. He's a podcast host, a business owner, and a horse doctor's husband. Yeah, you're going to hear the definition on that, the explanation, but that's one of the labels that he shares, and we want to hear all sides of his life here in the limited time that we have. But Justin, welcome to our program.
Hi, Randy. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited to be here.
Well, absolutely. We're excited to have you, anxious to hear how life has worked for you, and I always love the variety of ways that it happens. It gives us a chance to reach more listeners. We like to stay under that umbrella of just everything and anything recovery and faith, and so we're glad you're with us today. Justin, go ahead and briefly introduce yourself to our folks who maybe don't yet know of you.
All right. Well, as you said, my name is Justin B. Long. I put that B in there to separate myself from the actor Justin Long. We are both on similar roads, but we're not the same person. So I am, as you said, I'm an author. I've written 8 books so far. I have managed to produce the #1 podcast in the equine space called Straight from the Horse Doctor's Mouth, which I produce with my wife. I am married to an amazing, incredible woman. She is the most famous equine veterinarian in the world. And I get the privilege of running her business for her, along with some of my other side projects that I do, like writing books and stuff. But all of that is stuff that has happened in recovery for me. None of that existed in 2008 when I started down this road.
Boy, I'll tell you what, just by your sharing right there, I recognize how proud my dad would be if he was still living to hear this program. He called himself a horseman, all right? It was always just small farm stuff, nothing professional, nothing big time. But he loved his horses. I felt like I got introduced to the wrong end first. Growing up as a child, I ended up in the barn every Saturday morning. I thought it was, as I think back, I thought it was killing me, but it was actually just giving me a work ethic that's carried over to today. So I'm thankful for that.
For sure.
Yeah, that's an important part. What of those roles you just mentioned here, what would you say, other than your marriage to your wife, what would you call your passion out of those?
My passion, I think, is learning how I can expand my creativity, how I can grow into my capacity and my potential. When I started in recovery, I didn't really do anything. I have learned so many skills. I've learned a lot about myself, as we'll get into, but learning how to be good at crafts and producing things like the podcast. And we do a lot of video production for our YouTube channel, and just all of these things that I didn't know that I could do, that I've learned that I can do anything that I set my mind to. And when I find something new that I want to do, I know that I can commit myself to that and I will probably excel at it. And that is so incredibly satisfying. Like, I enjoy that very much.
That's powerful. That's powerful. Let's go back early in life prior to any addictions, okay? Tell us what life was like. Give us a little hint of maybe what led you into your addictions and the tougher times of life.
I know so much now. I think everything that I know about my life, I know in retrospect. None of it was real time understanding, especially when I was a young child. But I'm a victim of a generational curse of trauma and abuse that has happened as far back in my family as I've been able to trace. That every generation of my family has had some negative aspect that has dominated their lives, and that compiles. And as human beings, we absorb that and then we pass that on to the next generation. So my dad was not an alcoholic or a drug addict. He was a workaholic, is how he took out his trauma. And he felt like if he worked hard enough that he could eventually get the pat on the back from his dad. And my mom, my mom was the oldest of two children, and she had scoliosis that crippled her back up pretty bad. She had a big metal frame in her back when she was a kid. And so she was not the pretty perfect little girl that her mom could take to sewing circle and show off to her friends, but her little sister was. So my mom got ostracized from her family by her mother. So both of my parents were very emotionally damaged people when they met and came together. And I now know that I was just a victim of circumstance in that life, that I was just there, and it was never about me. But at the time, it seemed like it was all about me. So my dad took his workaholism out on me, and he would have this long list of chores for me to do every day. And when he got home from work, we would go through all of the things that I did and find all the faults with him, and I would get a spanking for all the shortcomings. And one of the examples that I use in my book is the firewood stack. That I had to stack the firewood all the way to the top of the rack, and it had to be perfectly flat across the top. There couldn't be any pieces sticking out the front or the back. And I would get a SWAT for each piece of firewood that was sticking out of the pile. So
how old were you at that time?
That probably started at 6, 7 years old. And I never got the firewood pile right, or any of my other things, right? Like it's impossible to hit that perfection every day.
Sure.
But I tried. I kept thinking that if I did just a little bit better, I could get it there, right? And I never did. And so what I learned about myself very young from my dad is that no matter how hard I try, I'm going to get punished, and I'm going to fall short of the goal. It's never going to be good enough. And my mom was not a disciplinarian at all. But when I would act up, as little kids do, make too much noise when she's on the phone or whatever, she would make me drag the big trash dumpster in from the curb and pull the trash bags out of that. And I would sit inside there and wait for my dad to come home and give me a spanking for whatever it was that I had done. And so I spent a lot of time in that trash can, which also prevented me from getting my chores done, right? So it was a double whammy on that. But that was my input from my two primary caregivers, is that I'm not going to be good enough, and I can be thrown away at any time. And so, as you can imagine, that destroyed any sense of self-value that I ever might have had. So I had very low self-esteem. I was extremely sensitive to criticism. And as I got into teenage years, I was finding any way to act out to try to feel okay about who I am, and just for a moment, like fit in somewhere, right? Because I had all these negative self-beliefs about myself. So I carried that to school and taught the kids at school that I'm a loser and that they could, ostracize me. I didn't have any safe place to be. And when I discovered alcohol in high school, that was the first time in my life that I ever felt okay in my own skin, felt okay about who I was and where I was at in the world. And that was an amazing turning point for me.
Did you start to feel like you were fitting in with certain people at that time? You were finding approval from your fellow friends who were into alcohol and other substances? Did you start to fit?
Absolutely. I was 13 the first time that I got drunk, and that was the first time that I had ever not been afraid of my dad. My dad was there where I was at when I got drunk, and he didn't know that it was happening until it was way too late. But I knew that that was going to be the end of the world, and I didn't care. And that freedom that came along with that was amazing. And I couldn't wait to do that again. And it was 3 or 4 years after that before I got to drink like that again. But I found a couple of friends who accepted me for who I was, and we drank together, and I felt plugged into a group. And so I associated all of those things, like alcohol and feeling good about who I am and having fun with friends like that. That's all one and the same for me. And I don't think I was ever able to separate those things in my mind after that. Like if it was drinking, I was having fun with friends. And if I wasn't drinking, I wasn't having fun, and I didn't enjoy where I was at.
I'm going to guess that these are the experiences that you share in your book, The Righteous Rage of a 10-Year-Old Boy. Is that right?
That's right. That is my journey through trauma therapy, trying to understand why I feel the way about myself that I do, and then changing the way that I felt about myself. So I didn't know all through my 20s, when I was a raging alcoholic, I didn't know that I was drinking that way because of the way that I feel about myself. I didn't know that it was all based on my childhood events, which form my whole identity and my understanding of who I was. I didn't have any knowledge of any of that. So sobriety, which led into therapy, changed my whole perspective of why I drink in the first place, and really helped me get some clarity on that.
You made the comment earlier, the idea of what you know about yourself, you've learned in retrospect. So that fits along with everything you're saying here. This particular book, I'm intrigued by something. What number is it of the books you have authored?
It is number 7 of 8. So it is my second most recent.
Okay. What were the first books as far as theme goes, the genre of the books? What would they fit in?
My first one was called The Adventures of the Horse Doctor's Husband. And it's my attempt at carrying on the legacy of James Herriot and All Creatures Great and Small. So it's a collection of short stories about all kinds of crazy horse emergencies that I've been on with my wife. And there are now 3 of those, and I'm working on the 4th in that series. So that's and that's my big seller. That's the one that I'm probably most famous for.
So give us just a moment's view of one of those emergency calls. We don't have to have all the details, but just so we get a feel for that.
Yeah, I think probably the most dramatic, we got called by the sheriff's department about a horse that was standing on the side of I-75 about 5 o'clock in the morning. And it was bleeding and gashed up and looked like it had been in a train wreck. And we went out and picked that horse up off the side of the road and got it in our trailer and brought it back to our vet clinic. And while it had clearly slid down the interstate. It had asphalt packed in his knees and skid marks down his side. He was scraped up pretty bad. And while we were trying to determine if this horse was salvageable and we were going to be able to save him, the sheriff's department was trying to figure out who he belonged to, and they couldn't come up with anything. There were no farms in that area where he was at. There were missing horses. There were no broken fences anywhere. Like, nobody had reported a missing horse. So we ended up putting a picture of this horse on Facebook, which we have a huge Facebook following for our vet clinic. And we were able to find a previous owner that recognized the horse, and the sheriff's department contacted them and found out who they sold the horse to. And they did a chain of custody thing. It took 3 days to find the person that had that horse last. And that person had given that horse over to a slaughter auction, which is a very negative side of the horse world in the United States. But it's a way of throwing. It's a really crappy way of getting rid of a horse that you don't want. And so this person, rather than giving this horse the dignity of a retirement, was doing that. So it would go to Mexico and get turned into horse meat. And somehow the trailer door came open while they were going down the interstate, and he fell off of the horse trailer, which should have killed him. and it ended up saving his life. It turned out to be the best thing that ever could have happened to that horse. And so he had 2 surgeries to clean up the infections in his knees, and he wound up at a retirement facility for rescue center for horses, and where he lived the rest of his life with international fame. He had fans all over the world because I wrote about it in that book. So he had an outpouring of financial and emotional support from all over the world the rest of his life, and it was a wonderful, happy ending to what could have been a tragedy.
Oh, that's neat. That's neat. I'm glad you guys were there. Like I said, horses may not have been my favorite animal, but I don't want to see them suffer needlessly.
No, absolutely
anyway.
not.
So I'm glad you guys could take care of that. Now, let me back up to make sure I've got this straight. Your first, and I think you said you're into book 4 or book 4 was about being the horse doctor's husband. Yes?
Right. Yes.
Okay. Then what followed on the tail of those?
Well, at the same time that I was writing those, I did write a science fiction series that was mostly me. I really love science fiction, and I was just trying to see if I could hone my craft on that. And while I love it, it's really not my thing. I found that my audience was people wanting the horse books. So I went ahead and finished my trilogies just for the experience of writing that and gaining, trying to improve my skills as a writer. But and the other book that I wrote in that period of time was called How to Become an Equine Veterinarian, which is a guidebook for teens, because we are running short on horse doctors. And so my wife and I consider it part of our mission to try to illuminate the way to get into vet school for young people, because it's the most difficult professional school to get into today. So we're trying to smooth that path a little bit with some knowledge.
Have a niece who just maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, finished veterinarian school. She went
nice.
to Purdue University
Mm-hmm.
and was attached there with so many things. I think she's mainly into small animals. They're big as hog farmers, and she's enjoying her career and everything that goes with it at this time. So
Very good.
where I'm headed with these questions about the theme of your books, I'm intrigued how, to me, and I'm sure you have your own thoughts on it, but to me, it's almost out of left field after those themes to bring in the story of your past and that rage of that 10-year-old boy. Was it a matter of you felt the confidence at that point that you could share your story in a very valid and beneficial way? Or explain that if you can.
Yeah. When I think I was around 10 or 11 years sober, when I decided to talk to a therapist. And I had been in therapy once before, and it was a positive experience. I learned some things about myself, and I gained some tools for dealing with my emotional challenges. But I still felt like I had an anger problem. And, in this new life, I was with my wife a couple of years at that point. I was running the vet clinic, but I was still, I wasn't quite right. I'd been sober for a long time. I'd vastly improved my life and my understanding of myself, but I wasn't where I wanted to be. And so I found a trauma therapist, and it almost immediately started getting results out of this. We did EMDR trauma therapy, which is a process that is used a lot with people with PTSD that have, suffered various traumatic events and that kind of stuff. And I didn't really know anything about it, but I was eager to try something different, because I have learned in recovery that when I do something different and get out of my comfort zone, it usually has a positive result, and I grow from that. And so I was happy to give it a shot. And we made a list of my top 10 traumatic childhood events that I could think of at the time. Like the stacking the firewood thing was on there. And that was a repetitive thing. It wasn't a one-time horrible event. It was a small everyday thing for years of my life type of thing, right? And she helped me go back into those events. Like we would go to 1985 in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and stand in front of the firewood stack with 8-year-old Justin and my dad and me. I think I was 44 or 45 at the time, with my adult perspective, and just examine that situation and see what's happening. And I knew that, 8-year-old Justin is standing there counting the pieces of firewood that are sticking out of the stack, beating himself up because he knew that he could have done better. And if he had paid attention instead of daydreaming, he wouldn't be getting as many swats as he was getting. But adult me can look at that and say that 8-year-old Justin stacked the firewood. The house was heated. We never went cold. He did a great job at everything he did. His dad is the one with the challenges in that situation. His dad didn't understand how to positively reinforce whatever it was that he was trying to teach. He didn't know how to motivate. He didn't know how to give a pat on the back and say, you did a good job. He didn't know how to be satisfied with any of the efforts. That's about him. That's about his failings with his dad and his inability to feel okay about himself if he just accepted something as it was. Like, it was never about Justin standing there stacking the firewood. It was never about any of the chores that I did. And with EMDR, I won't go into the science of it, but what we're doing is we're accessing these memories, and then we're changing the emotions that are tied to those memories. So in that moment, I changed my understanding of what's happening, and I also changed my belief about myself in that moment. So instead of feeling like I'm a loser that can't stack the firewood, right, because I'm not paying attention, I can feel good about myself that I did my job and I endured a hardship and I came out the other side stronger than I was when I went in. And we did that with event after event after event. We went into and sat on the back porch with 8-year-old Justin sitting in the trash can while his mom's sitting at the sewing machine working on a dress for the Historical Society. And 8-year-old Justin sitting in the trash can thinks that he can't keep his mouth shut, and he knew that this was a possible consequence, and that he never remembers in the moment to keep his mouth shut and do what he's told. And 45-year-old Justin knows that 8-year-old Justin's a little kid, and of course he's going to run around and make noise and play airplane and do things. That's what 8-year-old kids do. It's part of being a child, and it's a shame that I was never allowed to be a child. But the woman sitting at the sewing machine is the one with the challenge in that situation. She's the one that doesn't have any parenting skills. She doesn't know how to do any of the things that she probably intends to do, but she's the one with the emotional dysfunction there. It's not the kid. And so again, I changed my belief about who I am in that moment. And when we do these over all of these events, my negative self-view turns into a positive self-view. And I came out 6 months into that therapy process. I was stunned at how different I felt about myself. Like, I had confidence for the first time in my life. I was far less concerned about what other people think about me. I was able to fire a bad employee that needed to be fired from the vet clinic. I'd never been able to do that before. All of these things were choking down my ability to thrive and function in life, and they were based on insecurities that I had about who I was from when I was a little kid. And so when I was able to change that and change the way that I feel about myself, it changed everything about my life from a negative experience to a positive experience. And I said, the world needs to know about this, because if I can change the way I feel about me, anybody can change the way that they feel about themselves. And that is security. I don't want to jinx myself or misrepresent what sobriety is, but when I feel good about who I am, I don't need to worry about relapsing, because I don't need to put a chemical into my body to change the way I feel about myself, because I already feel good about who I am. So like that, I think, is the ultimate goal of recovery, is to get to that place where we feel good about who we are, because the vast majority of us drink or do drugs or shop compulsively or gamble or have promiscuous sex with strangers or whatever it is that we do as a compulsive behavior because we don't feel good about who we are. And there's a way to fix that. And I felt like the world needs to know that. And that's why I wrote the book.
Would you count that as the time where the light came on within you that says, I am of value and worth? I deserve to be a better me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it took me a long time to get there, but I am so grateful that I did get there, because I know a lot of people don't. But I also feel like this is information that I needed to have when I was 2 or 3 years sober. I think I could have shaved a lot of time off of that, right? So that's why I'm so grateful that there's platforms like this. There's podcasts now. When I got sober, I don't think podcasts were much of a thing yet. And but there's so much more available to people now, so that you can learn. Hey, there's resources out there that you can take advantage of. You don't have to wait 30 years before you get to that. Do it today.
That's one of the positives of social media. We hear all the
Absolutely.
negatives. That's certainly one of the positives, that we have access to help that we didn't even know existed before.
Right.
And we can work with that and work toward overcoming it. When it comes to self-value and worth, what is, I don't know if this can be answered, what is an age range where we start to recognize I must be worthless, or I'm doing okay with life? What does that look like? Is that a fair question? I don't even know.
I think it's very, very individualized on the answer. My sense of self-value was negative as far back as I can remember. My sister was born on my birthday, which is around Thanksgiving in 1981. And so she was about a month old at Christmas that year, Christmas of 1981. And I don't know if I had acted any worse than I normally did, but my dad thought that I was a bad kid that year. And so at Christmas, my 1 month old sister had this big pile of presents, and I had a bundle of sticks with a red ribbon tied around it and my name on a Post-it stuck to it. And that's all I got for Christmas. And they made me sit there with my bundle of sticks and watch them open all the presents for my sister, who, has no engagement in what's going on because she's only 4 weeks old. But that is one of the earliest moments that I can remember feeling outside my family. There's that traditional scene in any Christmas movie where it's snowing outside and the lonely guy's walking down the sidewalk and he looks in the window and the family's gathered around the table, and like I felt like the guy out on the sidewalk in the snow. And that was at 6. I'm sure it probably happened before that, but that was my big, I am not part of this family moment, that I'm not part of anything. Like I'm outside. I don't belong anywhere. And I don't think that I was ever able to shake that until I got into trauma therapy in my mid 40s. So I had that feeling my entire life.
Are there triggers that set that off now that make you use your disciplines to get through? Or can you put that aside? Has that been put aside for now, or does it still rear its head?
It occasionally gets triggered. I don't think that we ever completely process things to the point that nothing can impact us anymore, right? So I still have knee-jerk reactions to things from time to time, but I have been teaching myself to recognize when that's happening, and so that I can I call it doing a manual override. When I recognize that an automatic thing has been triggered, I'm like, oh, that's not real. That's a false feeling. It's not 1985. This isn't my dad. My dad's been dead for 20 years. Like, I am a grown man at the top of my game, and this is not who I am. I am not going to fall prey to that belief, and I talk myself through it.
Justin, what would you do if you had a few moments with your dad? What would you want to say to him? Or maybe I should have prefaced that with, were you ever able to talk to him about today's Justin?
No, he died when I was still drinking. He got killed in a car wreck. And that's one of those moments that I measure myself by. My dad died when I was still drinking. And my mom died when I was sober, just a couple of years ago. And I get to compare how I handled my dad's death with me deep in all of my nonsense and drunk the whole time and just making scenes that people probably still talk about today. And how different it was when my mom died. But I have thought about that many times, because I would love to sit down and have a conversation about my childhood with my parents. But I also know that my parents neither one of them probably ever would have been in a place where they could have had that conversation that I want to have. Like, I don't think either of them ever got into that introspection and self-realization that I'm into. Right. So I know that it's not realistic, but if I was able to have a conversation with my dad, I think that I would simply tell him that I understand him now better than I ever did when he was alive, and that I forgive him for never growing past the point that he got to.
Would he, do you think, be able to understand that his actions needed forgiven, that the way he handled moments, the way he handled you, disciplined life with you, that it was worthy of bitterness, but you've chosen to forgive?
I like to think so. I cut my family out of my life as soon as I got out of high school. I joined the Army and got as far away from Oklahoma as I could get. And so I rarely interacted with them after that. But on the few times I did, I remember I spent a week with them the summer before my dad died. And my little brother, who's like 12 years younger than me, was in high school at that time. And I remember just sitting at the kitchen table and my little brother coming in and my dad saying something, go get this out of the car or whatever. My brother being like, go get it yourself. And my dad's like, all right, I'll get it later. And I'm like, who are you? Like, if that had been me, you would have knocked my head off of my shoulders. Like, it was such a different, just stunning experience. And I was offended at the time. Like, it really hurt my feelings that my brother had such a different, easier experience with him than I did. Right. And I resented him for that for a while, but I don't know now whether it was that he was getting older and mellowing out, or maybe he recognized some of the mistakes that he made with me and was trying to be different with my brother. I don't know. I never gave him a chance to talk about that, but I like to think that he was getting some wisdom with age. He died when he was 56. I think he probably could have grown a lot more, but he was a very different guy at 56 than he was at 36 when I was a part of his life. And I wish that I try not to have regrets, but I wish that I'd had the foresight at that point to be more open-minded about his journey and not just so focused on my own.
Give us 3 to 5 stepping stones of advice that you would give to the younger, that 8-year-old Justin, as if, your neighbor now was 8 years old and going through a very similar lifestyle. What's 3 to 5 steps you could give them? And we don't have to even take into account they may not understand those steps.
Right. I think the most important thing that I have learned in being involved with other people and other people's behavior is that nothing that someone else does is about me. Like, I took everything in my universe 100% personal most of my life. And I couldn't understand that it wasn't about me. But now I realize, and I use this at work. My wife and I have coached each other through this many times. When we have an employee that's turned toxic and being belligerent and freaking out and just, making the workplace a bad place, like, even if they're attacking us about things, it has nothing to do with us. It's about what's going on in their life and their ability or inability to deal with that. Right. And they're just trying to lash out the same way that I lashed out most of my 20s and early 30s, because I was in pain, right? I was a horrible person to be around in the workplace. So, but understanding that none of that is ever about you is a lesson that I wish that I had known all of my life. Number two, I would say, believe in yourself, not even if no one else does, but especially when no one else does. I have so much capacity to be whatever it is that I want to be, do whatever I want to do, like infinite capacity. It's unbelievable. I haven't found the edges of it yet. And I think that most people are probably that way. But because I believed that the square that my dad drew around me defined the boundaries of my box, I never tried to step outside of that for years and years and years. I stayed inside that imaginary line, and I never knew that it was imaginary. But I find the fact that I've written 8 books amazing sometimes. Like, that just seems like such an impossible thing for somebody like me. And then I think about the fact, well, I did that, and I've done a whole lot of other things that I think are more impressive than that. And it's because I started believing in myself, and I started believing that I do have the ability to do more and be better. And that has changed an awful lot of things about my life. Number 3, if I could tell myself as a child, I went through a lot of periods in my childhood and in my 20s where I just didn't want to be a part of the world. I had a lot of, I wouldn't say suicidal tendencies, but suicidal fantasies. I remember very young, I realized that we had a concrete bird bath in our backyard, and the bowl of it was off on the ground, and so it was just the column with about a 12-inch pipe sticking out that the bowl sat over. And I remember thinking, if I climbed that tree beside it, I could jump off of that spread eagle and just spear myself on that bird bath stand, and it would all go away, and my parents would feel guilty and realize what they've been doing. And just thoughts like that all my life. And the older I got and the more miserable I got, and the less I accepted myself, and the more my circumstance, especially when I was in a long-term relationship and getting drunk and trying to have sex with any woman that was in the vicinity, because that made me feel better about who I was for a minute. If I could get sexual attention from somebody else, like the shame that I carried for all of those behaviors just piled up and piled up and piled up on me. And I didn't want to be in this world. But I would tell myself that there's going to be dark times. There's going to be some really dark times, but there's also going to be some really fantastic times. And the good times are worth going through the dark times to get to.
Amen. Hey, we're getting near our time here, so I have one more question for you. To what do you attribute being where you are today? I know therapy's got to be near the top, but I mean, what has allowed you to complete that therapy? Yeah, help us with that.
I think one thing my dad did for me is the same that yours did for you. Is I got a terrific work ethic, and I was never allowed to quit something, and that stuck with me. So I, probably to a fault, do everything that I do in my life to 150%. I always have. And so recovery was no different for me. Like when they said do 90 meetings in 90 days, I did 120 in 90 days. And it took me 2 years to find the sponsor that changed my life. But when I did, he introduced me to a workbook called A Gentle Path Through the 12 Steps by Patrick Carnes. And that was like a year of my life going through that workbook, working steps. And that's when I started learning about self-awareness and family history and all these things. It was stunning to me. And that committed me to doing everything that I do in my life to 150% because my life started getting better a lot faster than it ever had before. And so I attribute it to work ethic and just desire to change and improve, change and improve, change and improve.
You know, I cannot say my dad was, he didn't treat me in the way you were treated, but Dad was a hard guy. He loved you and you knew it. He just didn't always remind you of it, okay? But
Right.
as you share this, I can relate to very much of what you're sharing. We have those commonalities. Hey, we have a question here from one of our
Okay.
listeners. Eric, share that with us.
This goes back to the more of the horse related stuff. What does your wife think about Dr. Pole?
Oh, bad. Dr. Paul practices 1950s medicine, and it is appalling the things that he gets away with. He's been reprimanded by the Board of Veterinary Medicine several times. It's entertainment, but don't think that it's real medicine because it's not.
You know, I don't know who we're talking about here, but that sounds like
He has a
good
TV show.
fair. Aha. Okay, that
Yeah.
sounds like a good fair answer. Okay, yeah, don't think it is medicine. TV's got a
Yeah.
lot to do with that, and I don't know him, and that's fine. So yeah. Well, listen, is there anything you'd like to wrap this up with, Justin? Man, you've given us a lot to think on, and that's much appreciated.
I just want people to know that you have value. You have value as a human being. Your value does not come from other people. Your value does not come from other people's opinion of you. You create your value and you get to determine what that is. And if you do not feel good about who you are, you have the ability to change that. And there are tools and resources out there. Don't give up on yourself because it will be better if you put in the work.
Amen. Hey, Justin, hold on. I'm going to close it out here, but stick around with us a couple minutes. I'd like to talk to you a little more.
Okay.
Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for your willingness to share. As I've already said, you touched on so much that we don't always get a lot of discussion over, and I think that's important as we look at who we are. My belief in life my goal in life, I should say, is to become the me that God created me to be. And that's what I'm going to work for. And with that same work ethic that you and I seem to have in common, even here in my years of retirement, I'm not ready to stop. There's too much more I want to experience. I like the way you said earlier, the edge. You don't know that you've ever seen the edge of your potential. Or your practices. I want to see that expanded. I want to know that I left it all in this life. So thank you again for your time, your willingness to share. Thank you for just inspiring us as you have. And folks, thank you for tuning in. God bless. Remember, as always, stay in the battle.